Welcome to Paranormal M, your window to the world beyond. Join us as we uncover the hidden truths and unearth the most spine-tingling stories from the realm of the paranormal. Subscribe, turn on notifications, drop an M down in the comments, and stay connected to our mysterious and hair-raising adventures. Zombie by the Cranberries and War Through a Child. Growing up, I was always immersed in music. My family always had the radio playing in the background. And, well, when we were in rural areas of my country where it would be impossible to have a signal for radio, CDs or vinyl and cassettes would come into play. Burning a CD was the first thing I learned to do on the computer. And we have such a big collection of burned CDs and bought CDs. I grew up listening to a variety of kind of music from various countries, but mostly listened to England, French, German, Swedish, Greek, Italian, Spanish, and a bit of Bollywood soundtracks, if, I like the movie. The same goes for movies that my mom's a huge fan of, like Scandinavian and French cinema, while my dad loves westerns, and my aunt loves silent, French and Italian cinema too. As a teen, I watched a lot of Spanish movies on YouTube trying to learn the language by myself. The last fact is that I'm a granddaughter of survivors of the Greek genocide that occurred from 1914 to 1922. It was in the Anatolia region, also known as the Asia Minor region. My maternal grandpa either fled as a child with his 5 siblings or their mother fled with him in her womb, and some of his siblings in tow. Things are unclear because I learned that 4 years ago, and whoever could give me more information is dead. At the time of the event I want to share, I was completely unaware of my family's history. The area my maternal grandpa's family is small. It's a village in Gallipoli. On to the post now. I remember my instant connection listening to Irish folk music and watching river dancing. I gasped and rushed to the TV and started bouncing on my feet trying to copy them. I would kiss the TV screen, trying to kiss every single dancer's heads, telling them how much of a good job that they did. I remember this sense of immense love and hope, the sense of home, and I remember breaking down crying when Mom told me that I couldn't learn this dance because we lived in a different country. Mom had found my reaction very funny, while Dad found it odd. I remember staring with this weirded out look in his eyes. One evening I must have been around 6 or 7, and I was at home doing some Christmas cards for my now late grandmothers and her family, just as a way to keep me busy while my mom was decorating and cooking lunch, since we waited for my dad to come home from going to get his mom from his hometown for the holidays. The radio, as always, in the background, was just playing. That's when the song Zombie by the Cranberries came on. I declared that this was my favorite song. Mom made a noise of approval, and then, intrigued, asked me if I understood what the song was talking about. I nodded and told her that the song was about war and death. At the time, I had barely started learning English, so I was nowhere near able to understand the song yet. Something was telling me that this was what the song was about. Mom looked surprised. I got curious and asked her if I was wrong, and she told me I wasn't. Then proceeded to ask me to elaborate on my own claim, and without stopping coloring, I told her that the singer sings as if she's like a mom grieving her dead children, while a bad soldier stands over her. She begs to reason with him, then went on to talk to me about how bad the war is and that I shouldn't grow fond of it. I reassured her that I knew very well how bad war is. Went on to tell her about my nightmares of dead bodies and feeling of fear I felt during the bad dreams, and of the news I usually caught Dad watching in the morning before work at the army base. And also how I didn't want Dad to die at war, like people in the TV or my dreams. Then I tell her that I'm a big girl, and if war happens, I'll protect her family with the moves that they taught me. Mom, but mostly Dad, taught me martial arts since I was 4, slowly starting when I was 2. I remember Mom chuckling and saying that war wouldn't happen, and that I should get those heavy thoughts out of my mind and just be a kid. I remember feeling offended. I turned to my baby sister, who was 1 year old, and promised that, I would be very scary so I could scare the bad guys away. A few hours later, Grandma came and I forgot about our conversation. Till it was late at night and woke up to pee and get a glass of water. I heard my parents in the kitchen whispering about me. It was about our song and the conversation. Dad doesn't believe Mom that I know what the song's about, and I was just maybe playing with her. Mom insists so much so, the next day Dad puts the song on from a CD and watches me react. I just tap my free hand on the table while drawing and moving my legs to the rhythm. Dad asked me if I knew what the song was about. I told him what I told Mom. He just nodded, stopped the CD, and opened the TV. Throughout the years, whenever the song would play, my parents would turn up the volume and turn to me and see my reaction, which most of the time was a smile and a thank you to them, while other times they would dedicate it to me. I had a few years to listen to the song on the radio, but in 2018 I woke up from a nightmare of dead bodies. A plane crashing. It was in Athens. My dad's death and the song's melody was playing on repeat in my head. The dream had the song's melody playing in the background. When I woke up, it was the first thing that it played. I truly love this song. It's one of my top 3 favorite songs, but how could a 7-year-old know about the subject of it, while it's in a foreign language that you don't understand yet? And why am I so drawn to Ireland? Although now I know I have a past life as an American soldier during the Vietnam War, could that have influenced my answer subconsciously? I also have flashing and small glimpses of memories that I've been killed by soldiers in various past lives. Could subconsciously have made that connection through ancestral trauma, make that connection considering my ancestry? Experiences I had, plus bonus of my aunt. I'm a scientist by education and trade, have worked in sciences, and a teacher in career. So I'm skeptical to the core. That said, I know unexplainable things exist, and I accept them. My first story is really short. I only know this from my mother. This is the only potentially scary one. When I was like 1 or 2, we lived in a house in northwest Florida. Apparently, my mom had a weird feeling at the house, and I would cry and scream every time we pulled into the driveway. My second story happened when I was exploring my spirituality and beliefs. I spent a lot of time learning about religions and philosophies from all over the world. I was raised Christian by a Catholic mom and an agnostic father, but I was given the freedom to explore, learn, and make religion and spirituality the personal relationship that it's supposed to be. In that time, I started delving into shamanic practices and went on a deep meditation journey. During the journey, I ended up in a forest. I met my guardian spirit. After a while, I was told it was time to go. I slowly came out of my state. It had been over an hour. I noticed the time had started the end. My music had ended, my incense was burned to nothing, and my room was dark as the sun hadn't set when I started. I made several more journals over the next few years, and even piqued the curiosity of some classmates who then sought out theirs. That said, I need to start making them again. My third story is a series of related feelings and experiences. The summer between high school and college, I went to Sequoia National Park. The first thing that happened was when I stood next to one of the trees and touched it. I was suddenly overwhelmed, nearly collapsed. I began sobbing as a tidal wave of emotion. And then a little later, I was standing at the base of a fallen tree, watching a mother brown bear and her cubs descend the hill. She and her cubs stopped at the other end. She sat there while they played. Every so often she would look at the people that had gathered, but when her eyes would meet mine, my eyes would well up and I could feel something warm and powerful stirring deep in my being. It was beautiful and peaceful despite the magnitude. The month after this, I was at an aquarium and a harbor seal kept swimming away and towards me. Every time it came back, it stared at me, and the intensity of that stare reverberated deep in my soul. Then at one point, it was like lightning struck me with the words, "This is what you're supposed to do." With an onslaught of thoughts, concepts, feelings, and it's hard to explain, but in that moment I felt more sure of anything. And I knew that I would overcome any and all obstacles and adversity. I changed my major to marine biology. I struggled, but the existential assuredness I got that day helped me through each challenge and persevere. Today I teach sciences in high school with a Bachelor of Science in Marine Biology and a Master of Science in Aquatic Environmental Science. In 1999, I lost my best friend at the time. He was a horse named Stormy. He belonged to my aunt, and I saw him every weekend. I changed schools during elementary school, and so he was my friend through all of it. Losing him was so devastating. Growing up for many years until I met my guardian angel, I could feel him at my lowest times. In 2019, I had my little old lady cat go. She was 19, and her health deteriorated very quickly. I had her from 6 weeks old to the last Friday of that May. The last night that we had her, she went blind and deaf in my arms. Her kidneys failed. Tried to give her some water and it just went right through, no filtering. It was heartbreaking. I held her all night and didn't sleep. I spoke to her even though she couldn't hear me. I knew she could feel the vibrations and the beat of my heart. She could smell me, because when I moved a certain distance away, she would freak out. Friday morning, we took her to the vet and held her until she was gone. I felt so bad because the week before we took her to the emergency vet for something that they could help her get past. She was alone without us. It was 2 hours away. That was for 7 days before they released her back to us. She had fluid on her chest and they drained it and wanted to keep her for observation. They were hopeful and positive she would improve, and she did. However, they noticed other things, wanted to extend the observation. They called me to tell me that they had found evidence of severe underlying neurological problems that she wasn't going to make it. We went and got her and the events above occurred. So the paranormal part. We said goodbye Friday morning. Friday night as I lay down to go to sleep, I suddenly feel her soft steps jump into the bed, climb up onto my chest, curl underneath my chin. I could feel the weight of her little 5.5-pound body right there, warm and breathing. She was never a purrer. She slept with me one last time, the way I held her the previous nights before she crossed the Rainbow Bridge. An encounter with human subconscious. We've been out for 4 days at this point with almost no sleep. We were a 4-man squad, operating completely independently, securing battalion-level safe data traffic. We got an order to relocate about 100 kilometers south of the coast. The day turned out to be quite long, and a long story short, we were at combat readiness in the new location at around 3 a.m. As the squad leader and I decided to take first watch and let the guys get some well-deserved rest, so I grabbed my gear and started walking toward our guard position down the road from our camp. Guard position in this context meant a concealed position in a ditch with a good view down the road. I got to the spot so it was just over 200 meters from our equipment. There was a bit of snow on the ground. The sky was clear and it was absolutely dead silent in the woods. I just laid on my back, leaning on the back of the ditch. This spot was lower than our camp. This was down the road into a kind of small valley, and it was a thick spruce tree forest. so all sounds that there would have been in our camp on higher ground and almost on the shore, you could kind of hear the sea from our camp, just died down. I was dead tired. I laid there on my back, just staring at a few stars peeking through the branches of the spruce trees, until I realized it wasn't as silent as I had initially thought, and that I could actually hear sounds from the woods behind my back. Just the most subtle little cracks, rustles, and other natural sounds. But as I concentrated on them, it was almost loud. Those little rustles became almost overwhelming sounds. And suddenly I felt this fear of something. I immediately opened my eyes and jumped up, looking behind me into the dark forest. I didn't see anything, but I had this unexplainable sense of being extremely vulnerable, like something was preying on me. I just gripped my rifle harder and even flicked off the safety, kept looking into every direction because I was completely circled by this thick, dark forest. I did have 4 mags of blanks on me, so I thought nothing else. Full auto blank as fire is a good way to scare away predators. Although in these parts it was quite unlikely to run into anything that would pose a threat to a human. The weird part was that I couldn't control my reaction at all. I was able to think clearly and tell myself that this is idiotic, there's absolutely no threat out there, no reason to be afraid. But it was like different parts of my brain weren't able to communicate with each other. Maybe because, while I did realize that there's no threat out there, and that this reaction is very unnecessary, at the same time the feeling of dread became deeper and deeper. You know the feeling like having an invisible force pulling you down? Almost like you would weigh 1,000 pounds. I was looking out into the forest and the darkness was just swallowing me up, almost like it was getting closer to me from all directions. Almost like the darkness itself was a sort of being, and the sound from the forest became totally exaggerated. At this point, I'm in the middle of the road on one knee. The light snow cover on the road seems like the only thing I can see anymore. It was like this tiny island in the middle of a void of darkness. A darkness that was trying to overpower and get to me. The guys are sleeping just over 200 meters away from me, but it felt like it could have just as well been light years away. Like everything was light years away, really. Like I was completely separated from everything I know on a totally different plane of existence. Sort of like being lost at sea. I was lost in the dark, drowning in it. What made this such a weird experience is that it truly was like half of my brain went completely rogue. The other half was talking sense and being calm, and the other refused to listen and was ringing every alarm bell. It was like I was calm and panicked at the same time. At some point, the reasonable part of my brain took control and shit just calmed down. I just stood there thinking, what in the Blair Witch Project fuck was that? Not sure how long the experience lasted. It felt like a short moment, but it definitely lasted longer than it felt. At some point not too long after, one of the guys came down the road to release me from watch duty. Smoked a cigarette, chatted for a bit, and then I walked back to camp. Crawled in my sleeping bag, still thinking about it. Never told anybody about that, actually. I think I just allowed myself to sleep in the next morning. Never experienced anything like it before or after. Sleep deprivation is a hell of a drug, kids. I think it's always a bad trip. Definitely learned from that and made sure all of us got more sleep from that day on. My sister finally believes in her attic spirit. Over the summer, my house has recently gained quite active spirits. We don't know where it came from, but I think it lived in the attic. And since I was cleaning the attic this summer, I must have disturbed it. And now it's become more active. I don't think it's evil, but it has the ability to speak. I, for one, have heard it say, okay, when I was home alone and asked it to stop slamming doors. Now on to the case at hand. My sister and stepmom were away this summer, so they didn't experience the attic spirit's arrival. But when I had friends over, they would hear it walking around upstairs and doors slamming or having lights turn off and on them. Once my sister and stepmom got home, people instantly got to telling them about what was happening. She laughed in their face, for the past months telling me I was making it up and I was going insane. Kind of a freak. This continued till Wednesday, when it finally decided to show itself to her. On Wednesday, my sister was cheerleading. She was late to be leaving and was in a rush. And as I've said on my previous post, my sister is very abusive towards me. So I'm there sitting in my room as she's screaming at me to get her stuff ready, because she doesn't want to, blah, blah, blah. So I told her to fuck off and do it herself. She responded by kind of walking toward her bedroom, but before she could get to the sound of footsteps running up the stairs and her bedroom door slamming in her face, she was shook, began asking me how I'd have done that. And now she finally believes in the attic spirit and doesn't call me a freak for believing in all that. Attic spirit and Goth Dino 10, little sis. Secret societies exist, and somehow are connected to the paranormal. I pledged around 10 years ago, and never truly had a love for the stuff. It seemed cool, had perks, and my friends were in it, so why not? The only reason I stayed committed is because my friends' reputations were on the line. Anyway, during the hazing process, I always wondered why we did some of the things that we did. Chanting with candles, repeating lines over and over, burning certain thoughts into our head while getting beaten. I specifically remember us looking at a burning candle, stating that certain people were the light of the world, and me thinking to myself, this shit is demonic as fuck. Then one day it got confirmed. This day we were just naked for a majority of the day, chanting and reciting, till they finally gave us potato sacks to wear. They tied strings around our genitals and made us jump into fake glass. They did this while asking for trust. We also sacrificed a living animal. And all I could think of while doing this shit was, I'm selling my soul? Why do we do this? I got a generic answer stating that because our ancestors did it. I was truly pissed and cried a lot that following day because we had to sleep in a small room that night and I didn't want to show weakness. The next morning, all I could ask myself is what other fraternity did they learn these rituals from? Or how or why were these things taught? I was searching for answers. Anyway, the paranormal happened the same day. While driving my car, I particularly remembered that the sun was shining extremely bright on me. My brain kept thinking the world is yours if you want it. Everything felt extremely positive for some reason. Then I stopped to get some gas, and before I could even get near the pump, an older gentleman with a devious grin, not frightening but proud. He walked up to me and said he wanted to shake my hand. I didn't know this man from a can of paint, and I know he didn't know me. We were complete opposites, not even the same race. I shook his hand, then looked back up at the sun, which seemed to still be beaming on me. The man walked away. I don't know to this day if that man was a demon or an angel or just a random coincidence, but it all felt surreal. Needless to say, I know people are off to the Illuminati train these days, but I'm just here to say that my fraternity is at the bottom of the totem pole, and the things that we went through were extreme and really embarrassing to talk about. And I always wonder, what do people at the top of the totem pole have to go through? And how deep does the rabbit hole go? Interdimensional portal in an old pigsty. So this happened 7-ish years ago when I was 16 or 17 and was living independently for the first time since leaving the local children's home. The building I lived in was a very old stone cottage that was once used as a pigsty before being converted. It was converted on a caravan site that used to be a farm. The place was always freezing cold and always had a weird vibe about it. A bunch of odd things happened there, but this was the main thing that stuck with me by far. At some point whilst living there, probably around the 6-month mark, I lost my keys. It doesn't matter to me much because it was just out in the sticks in rural Wales, but I felt I could confidently leave it unlocked with no bother. I was able to easily get spare keys for the other ones, that were on the ring at least. Whilst not being too worried or thinking that finding them was very urgent, I did search the place top to bottom for them multiple times over the next 7 or 8 months, but never found them. Nor did I come across them when I had organized cupboards and drawers or moved furniture around. They were just completely gone. One morning I woke up around 10 or 11 a.m. and came straight through into the kitchen. The place was a long rectangle with 4 rooms in a row, from right to left: bedroom, kitchen, bathroom, tiny hallway with front door and living room. I was doing that to make coffee for myself as usual, and there, right in the middle of the kitchen counter in front of the coffee pot and kettle, as if I had just left them there the night before, were my keys. As you can imagine, I was floored by the perceived nonchalance that these inanimate objects were sitting there with. Instantly, my thoughts turned to sleepwalking, downright forgetfulness. But I still knew in the back of my mind that none of this explained it. I went to go grab them and instantly dropped them because of the searing pain in my hand, like they were hot, like metal baking trays straight out of the oven hot. Hot like they had been sitting under the sun on a corrugated metal roof all day in a summer hot heat. I made myself coffee, making sure not to touch them, left them there all day, then eventually picked them up and hung them on the hook next to the door. Didn't lose them again. Some other things that happened. Hearing a woman crying outside my window during winter when there were no guests staying in the caravan or camping section of the park, which was in a different field, by the way. Repeatedly walking up to find a suited man sitting at the end of my bed in the middle of the night. Not sure of dreams, but never really felt like dreams. Doors opening and closing that I knew were not open or closed beforehand. Wardrobe being opened and things being dragged out of it whilst I was out of the room. This happened a lot, no matter how I stacked them in there. The door on it was one of those that you have to push inwards for it to release the catch and open outwards, if you get what I mean. TV turning on and off by itself, lights flickering and bulbs breaking way more often than it's normal. Could have been faulty wiring, of course. Extra cold and warm spots throughout the building, which I often walked through and felt forming and dissipating next to me. I used to sleep with an electric blanket under my bottom sheet, and 2 or 3 blankets on top of me, and I would occasionally wake up freezing with 1 or 2 of the top layers on the other side of the bedroom. No way I could have kicked them that far in my sleep. Once I woke up with my bed a foot away from the wall. It was a divan bed with wheels, so we're not in an area that experiences earthquakes or anything like that. Anyway, I moved out when I was 17, and social services don't put kids there anymore due to some unrelated issues. Which I'm glad about in many respects, but feel free to ask questions, share any similar experiences, or share explanations. Paranormal experiences, glitch, unexplained events, sleep paralysis. For context, I live in Ireland. I migrated from Poland when I was around 12 months old. I moved to this current residence in 2009 when I was 7. When we first moved in there was nothing about the house that made it creepy. It was a 2-bedroom house with an attic which my parents later converted into my bedroom. I'll quickly explain the layout of my bedroom. My bed is directly opposite the door which leads straight onto the stairs. The stairs curve down left, so there's no actual landing outside my door. The stairs also curve left, one again into the upstairs hallway where my parents' and brother's bedrooms are located. This will probably become relevant later. So my first encounter with a shadow person didn't come long after moving into the newly converted attic. Since my bed faced directly opposite the door, I saw the stairs leading down, if it was left open, you know. My parents left my bedroom door open when I was younger. Couldn't tell you why. Whenever I lay in bed at night, I would be greeted with a pitch-black silhouette. It would usually just stand there, and me being a terrified 7-year-old, I stared back. Even though I couldn't make out any facial features, I could still recognize that it was staring right at me. Now, I can't be 100% sure if this is, but I'm pretty sure that it wore a hat. I say he as he gave off a male vibe. I would always be terrified to close my eyes and would usually turn my back on him whenever I saw him, which was most, if not all, nights. I never heard of a shadow person until years later when I was talking to a friend. I also had many encounters with footsteps in the upstairs hallway. I remember one of the clearer times when I stayed up during one of those nights and just clear as day heard the running of footsteps right underneath me. At this point, I'd lived in this house for at least 5 years, so I got used to the sound of creaking of the poorly built floorboards in the hallway. I surprisingly wasn't really scared, but more fascinated since I'm a big horror geek. The next morning when I asked my mom about the noise, she looked at me as if I was insane. She's not the biggest believer of the unknown. There was another time where I woke up at 3 a.m. This was fairly recently. Maybe 1 to 2 years ago. I remember it was 3 a.m. as I woke up without the grogginess that I usually have. I was wide awake. One other thing I forgot to mention is that I have one of those long rectangular mirrors attached to my door. So from my bed, I can see practically everything of my bed. That night I woke up and the first thing I saw when my eyes shot open was a black hand at the opposite end of my bed. The weirdest thing was that it didn't disappear. I was staring at it, but the next thing I noticed it was gone. Just like that. I was also very relaxed. I'm a very anxious person and have been on medication before, so for me being calm in this situation was just abnormal. I just kept looking around my room, and the next thing I know was 5 a.m. I swear to you, it didn't feel longer than 10 minutes, so where did those 2 hours go? Still have no explanation to this day. Me and my friend also tried handmade Ouija boards, but never got anything exciting. That same friend was also a very big believer of the paranormal. So when we saw a girl on the 3-wheeler bike disappear in front of our eyes, it was something that really hyped us up, not gonna lie. The bike had 3 wheels very low to the ground, where one had to practically lie on the bike to start it. We were walking back from a shop in the summer, and something made us both just stop what we were talking about and look at this little girl on the right of us ride that bike. We both then looked back at ourselves, and I shit you not, a split second later when we looked back, the little girl was gone, and the bike was rolling towards us on its own. We both were so dumbfounded and began to look around where the little girl could have disappeared in the split second that we were looking at each other. My parents have left me in my house alone many times while they travel back to Poland with my brothers to visit my grandparents. I love staying alone since my house can get very loud at times. However, the footsteps and the closing of doors can get a bit unsettling when you're alone downstairs in the dark. It's annoying since this only really ever happens when I'm alone, and honestly, I don't feel safe at all when it gets dark. This house has just unsettled me for the longest time. I don't get scared easily either. Like I said, I'm a big horror fan and will watch scary-ass horrors at 3 a.m. alone in my room. Saying that, the footsteps don't make me shit myself, but they're not comfortable to hear. The last experience I'll tell you, since this is getting long, happened a few weeks ago. I've always heard people talk about their sleep paralysis, and as much as they interest me, I'm so very terrified of experiencing them. Saying that, When I woke up in the middle of the night, to me, not being able to move, I knew exactly what this was. I knew I was dreaming, and I knew that it was sleep paralysis. My body was so stiff and I couldn't move or talk. I was laying on my back with my hands on either side of me and my legs lying straight down. My head was facing the left when I felt someone staring at me. I can't exaggerate this enough when I say flipping my head from staring to the left side of me, having it kind of be straight up, was the hardest and most difficult thing I've ever experienced. My neck was so stiff, and I used so much energy just to move it 90 degrees. I looked down, and on the right corner of my bed was a small creature. He was darker than my pitch-black room, and I could make out a tail. Honestly, the best I can compare it to is like a stereotypical image of the devil. Except it was small, maybe 1 meter in height. It was pitch black and didn't have horns. I was so scared, but I couldn't scream. Then I felt something heavy on my legs. It felt like even smaller versions of the creature slowly crawling up my legs. They were so heavy, and I could just feel their hands from above the covers. I then began to scream for my mom, and she came into my room and said nothing, just lied down beside me. This was odd, since she'd never just come and lie beside me, especially since I was screaming. The next thing I know, I wake up. Same position, same dark room. The positions of the pillows and cover become exactly identical. My mom wasn't there. I have no idea if I can ever call that sleep paralysis since I woke up again, but I can tell you that it was real. Too real to be just a dream for sure. Bedtime shuffles. I was staying at my partner's house, who had not long come out of an abusive relationship. She was moving out of the house and had a few boxes in the bedroom where we were to sleep. She had a 6-year-old who was in the house with us sleeping in his room. I woke up during the dark early hours of the morning and heard him shuffling about at the bottom of the bed. I kept my head slightly under the covers and my eyes shut, as to be honest, didn't want to have to deal with the 6-year-old and was hoping he'd wake his mom up. After 3 or 4 minutes, I started to think that this wasn't him, and he hadn't tried to wake either of us up, just moving around at the bottom of the bed. Then I panicked. The X. I started to worry for us all at this point. Then I heard the footsteps I'd been listening to suddenly stomp and rush up the side of the bed on my partner's side. That was enough for me. I screamed as I flicked the bedside light on, expecting a confrontation. However, there was no one there in the lit room. No son, no X. In the next few seconds, both myself and my now awake girlfriend then heard footsteps almost running go back down the side toward the bottom of the bed across the room. To top off the experience, the boxes where the footsteps sounded ended suddenly tilted and rocked as if somebody had run straight into them. I have no explanation for what happened. My girlfriend had never experienced anything in the house before. My experiences living in the old area of Jerusalem. So around 6 years ago, I lived near Old Town Jerusalem. Most parts of it that are built are kind of a few hundred years old at most, but the foundations date back thousands of years. I used to hang out around there quite a bit during the evening and night. It's very beautiful and quiet while tourists leave, and plus, a good friend of mine lived there with her family. Most of the time there was nothing out of the ordinary, just tiny old alleys and streets. But I did experience some things that made me doubt my skepticism of the paranormal over the year living there. First, one evening as I was going to visit my friend, I suddenly felt really cold. This was around mid-August, which in Israel means over 30 Celsius. It was a pretty sudden shift. I had this strong feeling of being watched, and the streetlight near me was flickering. I kept walking toward her house, and a minute or so later I heard footsteps behind me. This freaked me out as the street seemed pretty empty, and and the footsteps sounded close. They came out of nowhere. I had to turn right a few steps later, and as I turned, I looked around and saw nobody was there. That creepy being watched feeling just kept on going until I got to my friend's house. I did tell her what happened. She said I'm not the first to experience such things on that street. The second thing that comes to mind is that I was walking around the Russian area when I heard a strong bang coming from what looked like a public building. When I looked toward it, I saw the front door was wide open, which was odd, as no one was around. I looked for a little longer and saw what seemed to be a figure of a man looking at me from the front window. It was dark. I couldn't make much more of it. A second later, it seemed to disappear, and the front door slammed shut in my face. I noped the fuck out of there. Yes. I later found out that it was a Russian hospital. You can all look that one up. Apparently it's counted as one of the most haunted buildings in Jerusalem. So much so that some guards refused to patrol that area in the previous decades. The last one happened when my friend was with me. I joined her for an evening prayer at the synagogue. Not religious or Jewish for that matter, but I do enjoy the tradition occasionally. We left early since she was feeling bad. We were both heading to the backyard when we heard the gate open and close. We weren't in line of sight to it yet, but if somebody would go out, we would have likely seen them as there is only one path back. However, as we approached it, we didn't see anybody going in either. That for itself was odd, but as we walked toward it, it started slowly opening by what seemed to be like as if it was by itself. We both looked at each other, turned around, and walked toward the front gate, deciding silently that a freaky moving by itself gate isn't something that we'd like to deal with. After a few steps, we started hearing footsteps following us. We sped out of there, practically running, though my friend claimed at some point that she felt something grab her arm. Personally, I didn't experience that. But when we got to the front of the synagogue, one of the other ladies was also outside and leaving toward her home. She saw how frightened we are, asked what happened. We told her that we heard somebody chase us, and she claimed she saw nobody behind us. Stayed away from that synagogue ever since, even though it's kind of counterintuitive as places of prayer usually don't have this kind of experience. I had a few other weird vibes and feelings of being watched when I was living around there, but nothing visual or auditory except these. Still sometimes doubt it's thinking it's just me being a little edgy since it's kind of a really old, kind of quiet place, especially after dark. My mom wasn't home. I've had some friends make fun of me for believing in the paranormal, but I've had too many things happen to me to just brush off their existence. Here's the most unexplainable thing that's ever happened. In my last house, I seemed to be the only one who experienced weird phenomenon. So when we moved and nothing happened for months, I was satisfied that whatever was in the old house didn't follow us. Until one day, my two younger brothers and I were in the kitchen eating breakfast. It was probably around 7, so there was plenty of sunlight. I sat near the window at the table while my brother ate at the island. That's when we heard my mom call one of my brother's names. It sounded like it came from the hallway. In the hallway, you'll find a bathroom, the laundry room, and at the end of the hall, my room and my brother's room. So my brother, we'll call him R, perks up and says, "Did Mom just call me?" I tell him yeah, and he gets up and goes to the hallway, which isn't viewable from where my other brother, B, and I were sitting. We continue eating, and a few seconds later, R comes running back and asks where Mom is. "You are loud, sir." I shrug and say, "Check our parents' room," and off he goes. He comes back out looking confused and about to say something when my mom calls him again, coming from the hallway. So R runs back to the hallway while B and I give each other a weird look. R comes back from the hallway again, very confused, when my dad suddenly comes down the stairs, where he said he'd been ironing. R asks where our mom is. My dad says she left for work early, and I immediately felt uneasy, so I asked exactly how early. 6 a.m. She left at 6 a.m., an hour before the event happened. I can't explain an explanation for it. 3 people witnessed it. My dad didn't hear anything. We clearly heard my mom's voice yell ours name twice. My mom was long gone, already at her job. No other woman lives with us. The voice was loud and monotone, too, as if my mom were calling for R to put his clothes away. That was the first paranormal experience at our new house. Now we've had a few more things happen, and I always happen to be there, just like in our last house. I'm beginning to wonder if it's because I was born on Halloween that I attract these things. I don't know, but whatever was in my old house definitely followed us. I came across something I've never seen before tonight while driving. I was driving around Maryland, specifically Fort Howard area, before you enter the actual park past the gates. If anybody's familiar with this area, it was around 8:50 p.m., so it was dark. This area is near a state park and has a lot of wooded areas. I was driving and felt the urge to glance on my left. I saw something I've never seen in my entire life. I see this white human-like creature, like a pure white color, looked blackish and gray in some areas, like it was like dirt or ashes of some sort. And it has just these 2 black eyes. No other distinguishable facial features, no clothes, no real defining features other than a skinny, lanky body and black eyes. It had a noticeable protruding rib cage as well. I get freaked out and drive further away from that area and pull over to regain myself. I have a Bluetooth transmitter for my radio, and as soon as I start to slow down and pull over, my radio changes from the station I had set to a completely different station that was 3 stations away from the one that I had. I would try to change it back, then it would go to static and white noise. I finally figured it out. Once I started to pull away from the area, it went back to that same station it had changed to before, and the lights inside my car came on. But the knob wasn't switched to the lights being turned on. I drive an older car, and the switch turned the lights on the insides on the left of my steering wheel with a sliding knob so I can adjust the brightness. And when I turn the lights on, I can feel it click. And when I went to turn them off, it didn't click, so the light wasn't turned on manually. This was pretty brief, and the lights switched off on their own again after a bit. I turned around and sped back towards my friend's house so I could drop her off. I'm feeling quite uneasy still. The fact I've had this car for about 3 months and have never had a glitch like this was very odd. When I dropped off said friend, I started to get a wave of exhaustion just creeping over me. I've been feeling tired and drained ever since. Sorry for the long post and maybe jumbled up sentences. I just liked anybody's input on this, and if anybody's had some kind of idea of what this could have been or an explanation of any kind. The Woman in White. So a couple of years ago when I was 12, I was working this event called Thomas at our local train station. Before one of the days, me and 2 of my friends decided to go explore and try to find weird stuff in the museum. Mainly, we were looking for ghosts, the most famous being the Woman in White. Apparently, she was killed when someone pushed her onto the tracks when a train was coming and the wheels crushed her. While me and my friends were looking around, we came across a train car. We went in, and since it was very dark, I was forced to go first, because I was the only boy. As we were walking in the car, I spotted something in a next car, which was a mail car. There was a woman in a large old-time dress standing there. The unsettling thing was her neck was at an unnatural angle. She was turned away from us, and as my friend Emma saw it, she lost it and screamed. As she was screaming, the lady turned and her mouth opened unnaturally, and we all got the hell out of there. We had one more friend in the lobby. and when we explained what happened, she wanted to go take a look herself. We went back to the car but found nothing. As we were walking out, I was the last one in the car, and I stopped and looked back, and there was some light from the sun on the wall. A shadow passed extremely fast. Once again, I got the hell out, didn't tell my friend what I saw, as they would probably go back and look. I kept having nightmares about her. Mostly just her standing there with her mouth open with this unnatural scream. My mom, who worked at the station, has also seen her, just not as violently as I did. Hope I never see her again, though. One time was enough. Salt randomly appearing. Before you try to rationalize this, you have to know before it happened to me that I was a hardcore atheist. No paranormal bullshit. Everything could be explained by science, and if it's not, it's because our tools aren't sophisticated kind of a person. I would also rationalize it in trying to explain if it hadn't happened to me. It was such a simple thing that was so factual that there's no way I imagined it. I'm also not changing any details because I was so shocked by this that I kept replaying the event in my head over and over, telling people every single detail every single time to not forget the way that it happened exactly. Anyways, it was almost 10 years ago when I was a teenager living with my dad's stepmom and stepsister. I woke up on a Saturday morning. My stepmom and stepsister were gone every Saturday for my stepsister's cheerleading practice. My dad was making a traditional breakfast soup from my country of origin and woke up to eat it. On the way from my room, I passed by the kitchen to grab an individual placemat made out of plastic. I carried it with my hand vertically and put it on the table, placed my elbows on top of it. I glanced at it for a second to make sure that my pajamas wouldn't get dirty in case it was unwashed or stained from last night's dinner. It was clean. I put my elbows on top, started scrolling on my phone. After a few minutes, my dad came with the soup, walking slowly, holding it with both hands as he tends to fill the bowl all the way up. At that moment, he placed the soup down, topped the placemat, took my elbows out of the way, and saw a line of salt next to the bowl. It wasn't scattered, but clearly defined, like somebody had cut a bag of salt's corner and made a line with precision. It was 1 centimeter wide and about 10 centimeters tall. I looked at my dad and said, "And this?" He said, "I don't know, did you put salt there?" I said no and pointed out the fact that there was no salt shaker on the table. Went to grab a new placemat as I just sat there wide-eyed saying, "But what the fuck? How did it appear here?" I asked him if he had maybe had salt stuck to his hands while cooking. He said no, his hands and bowl were clean. Also, the line of salt was about 5 centimeters away from the bowl, and there was no scattered salt between the bowl and the line of salt. My dad told me to get over it and eat, like I was like, how? Random salt appearing out of nowhere? I brought it up several times to him, and he just said stop thinking about it. Obviously, I haven't listened. Ever since then, I don't consider myself an atheist, but more of an agnostic. I don't know the meaning of it or if I'll ever find an explanation. I read another post about salt appearing randomly in this form and decided to post after so many years. It was so fucking crazy. Apartment might have a ghosty friend. I think that my apartment has a ghost living here as well as me. Things fall off or fall over in the middle of the night for no reason. Stuff that's been on a shelf or on a wall for months suddenly falls off. The odd, loud noise at random times of the day and night when I go look, nothing's out of place at all. Like Ghosty is stamping about for the hell of it. I don't mind it, I guess you could say, but it's their home as much as it is mine. I've never felt threatened by it or anything. Whenever I hear one of these noises, I reply with, "I hear you." And the noises seem to stop for a few days until it happens again, and I say the same thing in reply. Almost like it's reminding me that it's here too. With that said, noises at nighttime are not cool, and I tell it so whenever it happens. A firm and simple, Stop it. Kind of all it needs. One night about a month ago, my kitchen bin line mysteriously lifted up and fell off the top of the bin at like 4 a.m. and crashed into the floor. I wasn't happy at all, so I let them know it. Hasn't happened again. How can I 100% prove that this is a ghost, though? I say it's a they, as I don't know their gender or name or anything. Ghosty is all about I could come up with. Is there any way of proving it one way or the other? If nothing else, I'd like to at least know their name. Ask Reddit. This is super late, but the reason I believe in the supernatural is because of traumatic experiences as a kid. It was Easter Sunday, and my parents had set up an Easter egg hunt in the house for my brother and I. The eggs were all over the house, and my parents had just put $1 coins in each of them, even in their bedroom and our bedrooms, bathrooms, etc. My parents put us out on a timer and said anything that we don't get after 30 minutes they would take back. My brother and I decided that when the timer started, we would go book it back to their bedroom because it was the furthest room from us, and we would work our way back. So my parents started the timer. We ran up to their bedroom and into the bathroom. We scoured the shower under the sink and shut the door, because there's a shelf that's hidden behind it that's probably open. There was an egg there. We grabbed it, but the door locked behind us. My brother and I immediately panicked and tried to open the door and bang on it and started yelling that our parents were cheating. Maybe they had done it on purpose. We were just playing around and it was all giggles and fun. Then the room started shaking. I immediately got freaked out. I was only like 8 or 9 at the time. My brother was 5 or 6. He was just kind of confused on why it was shaking. The blinds in the bathroom were shaking, and the window started flashing with really, really bright lights outside. I thought we were going to die. Started screaming and crying immediately and banging on the door for real now, and finally, after about 10 seconds, my thoughts turned to keeping my brother safe. I opened up the cabinet door and started trying to shove him in there, because I remembered my teacher telling us about getting something to protect our heads if we really had an earthquake. There was a really loud noise outside, like a lot of wind, and this really deep noise like something was coming towards us. My brother was too big to get fully in the cabinet, but I sat down beside it trying to hold the door shut, covered my head and closed my eyes and thought we were going to die. Then the bathroom door opened, and all of it stopped. My mom was looking super confused at me when I opened my eyes. I immediately jumped on her and hugged her and cried, yelling that it was an earthquake because it's the only explanation I had. My brother was stuck in the cabinet. She immediately freaked out and yelled for my dad, and he ran upstairs. My mom sat me on my bed and got my brother out. He was crying and scared too. I told her what happened. She probably would have thought it was nuts, but my brother confirmed the lights, the shaking, and the scary-ass noise. She and my dad had absolutely no explanation on this, and she said that they didn't hear us or any noise. They only came upstairs because there was like 5 minutes left on the timer and thought something was wrong if we were still upstairs looking for eggs. Or they'd be nice and give us a hint and go downstairs. About a week later, I told my neighbor about it. He was one of my favorite people because he was super funny and let us ride our bikes up his big driveway. When I told him about it, he immediately looked freaked out. He said that a long time ago, like 10 years ago, there was a bad plane crash in the neighborhood. I rode my bike back home and told my mom. She freaked out too, looked it up, and it was true. Since then, I've believed in that shit. Ask Reddit. I don't live in one, I hope, but I work at a restaurant that used to be the home of a family in the 1870s. The place is really haunted and famous for it. The other employees and the owners have their own stories, which are pretty spooky, but I have just the one. The Lady in Black. Few people have seen her, myself included, and you can tell from the separate stories and the way that they correlate that something paranormal is definitely going on. Now, for a bit of context, sorry if this makes no sense, The restaurant is divided into 4 rooms being converted from a house and all, with 2 rooms at the front booth adjacent from the lobby thing, and a hallway that goes to the back of one of the backs and the other 2 rooms adjacent to it. The room at the far right side of the house, the one adjacent to the hallway, is said to be the most haunted because it's separated from others and just kind of eerie in general. However, I think the room down the hall from it is definitely more haunted. I mean, it's got nice blue walls and a large window overlooking a little side garden area where the groundhog lives. If I were a ghost, I'd pick that room too. Anytime I pass quickly by that room, which I do quite a lot because I pay, kind of dependent on how much I work, I'm not very high on the restaurant totem pole. 9 out of 10 times I see a figure in that room. Not sure how, but I can tell you as I pass that it's a woman in a black dress who's very, very sad. I always double back to check, and there's never anyone there. She only appears when the room's empty. And I learned after I saw her that one of the women who lived in the house had a son that died. Also in the house, I believe. And I don't think that she ever got over it. So much sadness. I don't think I've ever felt such pain. I can't help but feel bad for her, alive or dead. That's the end of tonight's stories. See ya.